welcome to all our viewers and welcome to a new episode of Africa Today, our program bringing you all the latest news and events happening all around the Black Continent. My name is Angie Meher and I'll be joining you for this afternoon. And as usual, we begin with a look straight away at some of the news making the headlines. We begin with the Egyptian Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research. That's it. There is a need to make available to the public the outcomes of the African Development Satellite Project. It said the project was set up to measure the repercussions of climate change during the United Nations Conference of the Parties, or COP27, that Egypt will be hosting in the Red Sea resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh in November. We have more details in this story.
The Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research said Egypt is well prepared to provide training and technical support to scientific teams from African countries involved in the African Development Satellite Project. Khaled Abdel Ghaffar made the remarks in a meeting that was hosted by the Cairo-based Egyptian state agency EGSA to discuss the mechanisms of the project on Sunday. The gathering was attended by heads and delegations of national space agencies in Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana and Sudan, the 5 countries participating in the project with Egypt. Egypt announced the establishment of the project during the 7th Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TICAD 7, that took place in Japan's Yokohama in August 2019. The project seeks to bring African countries together to develop a space system that is capable of monitoring climate change. The statement was made by Egyptian Space Agency CEO Mohammed Al-Qusi in 2020. The system, the integration of which is set to take place in Egypt, should also act as a disaster monitoring tool and be used to observe and manage agriculture and water resources, as he said. The project comprises a small satellite as well as a satellite subsystem in each of the participating countries. Egypt has been selected to host COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh city in November of 2022, with ambitions to advance African priorities regarding climate change and to ensure the availability of sustainable investments required for developing countries to face the climate change impacts. The heads of the space agencies in the 5 countries highlighted the vitality of the project for ensuring capacity building of the participating scientific teams and monitoring climate effects on different fields in Africa.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're now delighted to be joined over the telephone by Dr. Ayman Ibrahim Abdul Wahab, the United Nations Environmental Affairs and Risk Management Senior Advisor. It's a very good afternoon to you, Dr. Ayman.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us and for your time. First and foremost, let's talk a bit about the importance of the African Development Satellite Project, which, of course, is very important and has been recommended to be shared, especially during the COP27 that Egypt will be hosting later on this year.
Well, actually, the significance of the African Development Satellite has to be emphasized in this time of seeing the effect of climate change, especially on the African continent and in the region in general.
Yes.
And announcing about this project in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is hosted by Egypt, it's a very big privilege to us as Egypt. And at the same time, it's a very big responsibility and an opportunity to emphasize on how climate change will affect our region and how, the first world countries should be held responsible for, abating and mitigating the effect of climate change. And actually, with this satellite, we are going to have a quantified, argument about how the climate change can affect our region, and accordingly, we can use it as a tool for discussing and for negotiating and for getting leverage in convincing, other parties to participate in this regard.
Yes, Dr. Ayman, why do you see the African continent as being one of the most affected continents from climate change, even though, you know, development-wise or industrialization on the continent isn't as high as other developed nations?
Well, first of all, the ecosystem of Africa is very delicate and is very sensitive. Although the natural resources of the African continent is very rich, we have rainforests, we have one of the longest rivers all over the world, if not the longest, which is the River Nile. And we have very fertile lands in different parts of the continent. But at the same time, these natural resources are very delicate and very sensitive. And, you know, there is this kind of balance which by the climate change, if this balance is tipped off, then we are in very big danger. This is the first thing regarding the ecosystem and the nature of the ecosystem and the balance of this ecosystem. Second, the lack of resources, I mean monetary resources, I mean budget. Although we have all these natural resources, but we don't have enough budget to put it into effect and to try to have a mitigating project to adapt to the climate change. And here comes the role of other countries who are big polluters, and we are affected by that pollution.
Yes.
So if we look at the percentage of carbon dioxide, methane, and global warm gases, you know, the African country is producing a very minimal percentage that does not affect negatively the climate of the Earth.
Yes, indeed, Doctor. Now, let's talk a bit about the African countries that are involved in the African Development Satellite Project. We've seen the Egyptian Space Agency CEO, Mohammed El-Koussi, saying this project seeks to bring African countries together to develop a space system that is capable of monitoring climate change. Could you tell us a bit about the repercussions of climate change and the importance of monitoring this climate change, especially with regards to African countries? How can they monitor in order to be prepared for these changes that are inevitable if the world doesn't take action to stop the escalation of global warming, for example?
Okay. Actually, monitoring is a very important part of this project, but it is not the end of it, because when we monitor the climate change, we will know exactly where are the sensitive parts of the continent which is going to be hit hard due to the climate change. And with this kind of information, which is very valuable information, we can put together projects and programs to mitigate the negative effects of the climate change. And actually, as I mentioned before in different programs, that the secret word in the coming decade or 2 decades is adaptation. How can we adapt to climate change? This is where we should you know, allocate resources and where we should put our efforts to adapt to the climate change. By monitoring, we will know what are where are the lowland areas that are going to be subject to flooding from the intrusion of seawater, and how we can protect it by sea walls or whatever kind of action, which is, by the way, very expensive. But at least we know exactly, we will know by this information and by this monitoring program where to put our money to get the best effect and to mitigate the negative impact of climate change.
Dr. Ayman, where do you see the African continent as being most vulnerable with regards to issues related to climate change? You know, what kind of changes do you expect the African continent to suffer from? We've seen all around the world flooding, wildfires, droughts, lots of different changes with the climate. What would you say the African continent is most susceptible to with regards to climate change, sir?
Well, actually, or unfortunately, the African continent is subject to most of the negative impact of climate change. And we have seen that already. We are living that already. We are not expecting what's going to happen. We see drought in many African countries, and we see flooding in other areas. So it's not one pattern. It's not like at the beginning it was called global warming. It's no more global warming. It's extreme winters, extreme summers. In some areas, it's flash floods that destroy agricultural land and destroy houses and drown people. In some other areas, no rain at all. So the climate change is very chaotic, and you cannot expect exactly what's going to happen. One day you have a very warm weather. The next day you have extremely cold weather. So that's the imbalance that is taking place not only on the African continent, but all over the world. But the problem of the African country is that we don't have enough resources to face this. And actually, right, for example, the African country is not used to the extreme cold weather, and many houses are not equipped with warming, with heating systems. So people are badly affected by that. We have seen children, die by freezing during night in Syria and in Lebanon, which is, it's inhumane, And we should stress on this point and hold the industrial countries responsible for, bearing their share of this and contributing, not just by lip service, but by providing funding and providing the know-how to protect the African continent from this chaotic climate.
Yes. Dr. Ayman, you mentioned a very important issue, which is the provision of funding. African countries need to ensure the availability of sustainable investments required to develop countries to face climate change. Could you tell us a bit about some of these forms of sustainable investments in this regard, sir?
Okay. Actually, everybody knows that all the industrial countries have been and are currently utilizing the natural resources of the African continent. So we have to pay price. We have to hold them responsible. As you have built, as these countries built their civilization on the natural resources of Africa, and they are still doing that, they have to pay back. And we have to make it very clear that these countries have to pay back and to contribute with meaningful, numbers of money to put it into projects and to put it into programs for abating the climate change. And it's a very good opportunity that we are hosting. We are hosting the COP27, and we can make it very clear during this event and to put everything in his right place and to hold them accountable.
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Ayman, one final question. As you said, Egypt has been selected to host the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh city in November. Very ambitious to advance, especially African countries' priorities regarding climate change. How would you list the African priorities in this regard, from the most important to the least?
Well, as I mentioned, that the most important thing is to make it very clear that the industrial world has to play its role in providing the finance to the African continent to abate the negative impact of climate change. And we have to stress on this point. And then the second point is they have to provide the know-how and the technology because, it needs very sophisticated science in this respect. There should be they should use mathematical models, modeling for the movement of the sea waves, the tide and ebb, the pattern of flash floods and rain and everything. and provide the project to mitigate these negative impacts.
Yes.
This is number two. Number three, it should be a collaborative effort. No one country can work alone.
Yes.
We are talking about a global phenomenon, and it should be dealt with globally, because climate does not stop on borders, on political borders. It's a cross-border phenomenon. So
Yes.
it has to be global-wise, and we are living on one planet, and whether we survive or it's going to be the beginning of the end of the human race.
Yes.
As simple as that.
Absolutely. Right. Dr. Ayman Ibrahim Abdelwahab, the United Nations Environmental Affairs and Risk Management Senior Advisor. I'd like to thank you very, very much, sir, for your time and your insight on today's edition of Africa Today. And we continue with more stories in making the headlines. Egypt officially returned to the JP Morgan Index on Monday, January 31st. This move came nearly 10 years after its exit from it in June of 2011. We have more details in this report.
The Ministry of Finance said that Egypt is one of two countries in the Middle East and Africa with the JP Morgan Emerging Market Bond Index. After 2.5 years of Cairo's pursuit of rejoining the JP Morgan Index by fulfilling the bank's requirements, which included extending the life of government debt, adjusting the yield curve, and raising the participation rate of foreign investors in government financial instruments, with an increase in the size of each version, JP Morgan Chase and Co. during October gave approval of Egypt's inclusion in its Emerging Market Government Bond Index as of the end of 2022, with an estimated weight of about 1.85%. JP Morgan confirmed that about 14 categories of government bonds dominated in Egyptian pounds, with a total value of $26 billion, are eligible for the benchmark index, with an average return of 14.9% for those bonds with duration between 9 months and 2 years. The bank's analysis indicated in April that Egypt's local currency bond market would benefit with returns ranging between $1.4 billion and $2.2 billion if Egyptian bonds joined the index. The ministry pointed out that Egypt is expected to access the index with 14 bond issuances with a total value of about $24 billion, with a share of 1.85% in the index.
And for our final news item, Africa's COVID-19 cases have surpassed 10.7 million, according to the African Center for Disease Control. We have more details in this report.
The Specialized Healthcare Agency of the African Union said the COVID-19 death toll across the continent stands at 2,308,241, and 9,654,002 patients have recovered from the disease so far. South Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, and Ethiopia are among the countries with the most cases on the continent. The CDC said South Africa tops the list with 3,594,499 cases, followed by the northern African country Morocco with 1,120,087 cases as of Friday evening. In terms of caseload, Southern Africa is the most affected region in Africa, followed by the northern and eastern parts of the continent, while Central Africa is the least affected region, according to the Africa CDC.
And with this final news item, we wrap up today's episode of Africa Today. We do hope you have enjoyed it. You were in the company of myself, Angie Meher. Many thanks for watching.